I am a very inspired young African woman who carries within her a passion, a deep burning passion to change the landscape of leadership on the African context. So Narachi's target audience is anybody who identifies as a leader. For me, the work is consistently reminding people that actually the authentic self is always there. You just have to remember it. You've forgotten it. It's often that part of yourself you're denying. At the end of the day, all of us have a unique gift that we come with to the earth that we will feel our most fulfilled when we start to unleash that gift into the world.
Hello, Africa. You're listening to 1000 African Voices. I'm your host, Avurengwi C, coming to you from our Johannesburg studios. 1000 African Voices is a program that profiles Africans of diverse cultures who have traveled and lived across the African continent and the world. In this series, we will collect and share stories from all parts of Africa. Welcome.
1000 African Voices.
Hello, Africa, and welcome to yet another episode of 1000 African Voices. I'm your host, Avurengwi C, coming to you from Johannesburg, and today we're joined by Rachel Nyaradzo Adams, all the way from Zimbabwe. How are you, Rachel?
I'm very well, thank you, Avurengwi. How are you?
Doing really well. Rachel Nyaradzo Adams. Sorry, I'm saying the full name. There's something beautiful about the full name. Can you just introduce yourself to the listeners of 1000 African Voices? Who is Rachel Nyaradzo Adams?
I am a very inspired young African woman who carries within her a passion, a deep burning passion to change the landscape of leadership on the African context and the African landscape. I am from Zimbabwe, as you said. I was born in a small town called Kadoma. Then I moved to Gweru, I believe, when I was 4 years old, and I was bred in Gweru. And then traversed the world studying and working, and in 2015 made the decision to move back home to Zimbabwe, where I started a boutique consultancy called Narachi Leadership. Narachi literally means with Rachel. So Na is with in Shona. And it's the idea or the inspiration behind it was to provide leadership development that is extremely personal and vulnerable, that allows the leader to heal their primal wounds, to work through the stuff that keeps them away from the true light of their leadership. Because of course, when leaders don't do their work, people suffer. And certainly on the African continent, we see, I feel, a lot of leaders who haven't touched that deep inner space that allows their true light to come out, especially in the political landscape. So that is my passion, and that is who I am.
I really like that, and there's so much to unpack. And thank you for explaining Narachi, because all day I've been scratching my head, Googling, thinking, what is Narachi? And so now that you've explained that it means with Rachel, it's like the perfect meaning. So thank you for that. You speak about primal wounds that leaders have. I'm quite interested to understand what you mean by that, sort of before we go to other questions.
So when we speak about a primal wound, we are speaking about traumatic experiences that a lot of us had when we were young or in our formative years. And a number of psychologists believe that you are essentially programmed and locked into a specific pattern, belief system, way of being at a very young age. Some schools of psychology say at the age of 7. Some schools of psychology say it goes in cycles. But essentially, we can all see in our lives that there's certain patterns that we see ourselves repeating. And so first of all, for me, it was to understand why that happens, because I certainly experienced that in my own life. But also more importantly, I'd experienced that in the leaders that I was led by and the kind of leader I was also becoming, and was kind of intrigued by this question of what drives the choices that human beings are making, the behaviors that drive them, and then also to then figure out what are the tools to support us in a continual growth process. So if we don't work on those wounds, we know that they become a part of what we call our shadow, which is that part of ourselves that we want to hide from people because we are not proud of it. But actually, in fact, it comes out more often than we think. That's one of the many things that then causes our leadership to not be as good as it could be. And so for me, the work of Narachi Leadership is really foundationally about that and many other things. But if we can work through, I believe if you can work through the wounds that people carry, then their light can really come out.
So with Narachi, Rachel, can you take us through what you do and what your typical client looks like? Can I just walk into Narachi offices and say, Rachel, please make me a leader? Or do you specifically target certain leaders that then become imbued with the Rachel Nyaradzo Adams way of leadership?
And let me be clear, it is actually not a Rachel Nyaradzo Adams way. We're looking for an authentic way. Whatever that leader carries with them as their authentic power is really what we're trying to cultivate. So Narachi's target audience is anybody who identifies as a leader, as long as they're not below the age of 16, because we're not qualified to work with children. And in fact, I prefer 18 and older. But essentially, we are looking for anybody who identifies as a leader, whether they're in the corporate space, in a startup, in a government position, whether they're in university or high school. Wherever we find leaders that are going to be impacting people's lives is where we are interested to be. Essentially, we do 4 things. The first is facilitation and workshops, which is bringing the tools as both theory and experiential experience to the audience. So we work 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 5 day workshops, depending on what is needed to be done. And then we also do one-on-one or group coaching, because essentially we believe that workshops and facilitation programs really provide an aha. So they give you a sense of, this is what's possible, but coaching is what really deepens it. And my background is that I was trained in ontological coaching, also in neuroscience coaching. I'm also MBTI certified, so I'm interested in personality types and how your personality affects the way you show up in the world. In ontology, we are looking at what is called the art of being, which is how are you, before you're actually doing as a leader, what is the beingness that is causing the way you are doing and generating the results that you're generating in the world. And then we also do speaking engagements. So I speak in various spaces, corporates, conferences. Next week, I'm on my way to Senegal for 2 weeks, where I'll be speaking at 2 different conferences, high schools as well, universities. And then finally, we do advisory as well. So because of the spaces I've been and the kinds of environments I've worked in, I'm sometimes called upon to just give advice based on my own idea of what's happening globally, especially around people trends and how to think about it. So I always say that I like to say sometimes I'm a people whisperer. I do anything that has to do with the human spirit, the human soul, human ambition, human desire, anything that has to do with our deepest wants and needs to be the best we can be in the world. I'm there.
So excuse my long pauses because there's so much to unpack. So when one goes through the work that you've done, your profile, there are certain things that stand out. So we're going to come back to Narachi. But before that, earlier I was talking to a friend. I said, later we'll be speaking to Rachel. And he said, no, ask her about the time she was Miss Gweru in Zim.
Oh.
I said, okay, no, it's fine. I'll ask that question. Then we can go back to the work that you do and where you intend to go. Miss Gweru 1998, as well as finalist in Miss Zimbabwe. I believe you were crowned the Miss Congeniality. Can we talk about that just briefly? Then we'll go back to the work that you're doing now.
I've never been asked this question before. This is so funny. Oh my goodness. So it was Miss Gweru 1997. It's such a funny story. When I was younger, I was skinny, which I no longer am. And my older sister thought it Patricia. She started to enter me into these beauty pageants, which wasn't initially my idea, but she sort of put the idea in my head. And then I just got into these beauty pageants, but they didn't, to be fair, they were not a passion of mine. It's just, I ended up being invited into these. And for Miss Gweru, which leads to Miss Zimbabwe, my geography teacher came to me one day and he used to call me Adams. He says, Adams, I've entered you for the Miss Gweru pageant. And I was like, why would you do that? And he says, no, you must enter these things. You must do these things. I never forget this. So I end up in this Miss Gweru pageant, really unwillingly and reluctantly. I was doing my lower six in the Cambridge education system, my A level. So I was in the lower six, still with another year to go. So I had no interest in entering anything major that could lead me to Miss Zimbabwe. So when I won Miss Gweru, I literally actually cried when I was being crowned. And people thought I was being a typical beauty queen. I was crying because I was literally crying going, why did this happen? What am I going to do? So I did end up in Miss Zimbabwe, which was completely out of my depth. I was 17 years old. I had no idea why I was here. It was an interesting experience, very enlightening. It definitely showed me who I wasn't, that's for sure. And, sometimes experiences are good for that. They show you who you're not. And if you learn the lesson, you move on. And certainly that was the last time I ever modeled on a stage. And yes, one Miss Personality, or what you call Miss Congeniality. So it was a very interesting experience.
Okay. Now that is out of the way, yes, we will move on. And thank you for indulging us. It's always interesting. But what I'm taking away from what you've said now is sometimes it's just as important for us to learn who we are not as much as learning who we are, because it's only through learning who we are not that we can then start refining the person that we are. So that's really my takeaway. So yes, it was, I suppose, a weird experience for you, but the takeaway for me and hopefully for some of our listeners is that key message that if I understand who I am not, I can then start doing work to understand who I am. All right. So you went through that and I'm sure you learned a lot through that. Then you went to university. You did an honors degree in social anthropology, ended up with a master's in African studies. I believe that was at Oxford. Why the choice to study African studies? Because I assume you had many choices, but the choice that you made was to pursue a master's qualification in African studies. Why the choice, Rachel?
So first of all, when I started with anthropology, I was drawn to it because of my fascination, as I said, with people and the choices that we make and the way in which we formulate what we call humanity was always a fascinating subject for me. And African studies seemed to me a perfect opportunity to understand how Africa has come to be the way that it is from a historical perspective. And I was also fascinated to do it at Oxford. Well, firstly, because I got accepted and, at the time I was like, you don't say no to Oxford. Oxford accepts you, go. But secondly, because I was interested to understand how our former colonial powers framed Africa. How were they perceiving and seeing us? And what were the implications of that was an interesting question for me. So that's why I did that. It was still with an anthropological focus. So my dissertation was anthropological, but the subject matter itself was Africa pre-colonialism, during colonialism, and after colonialism. And I mean, already you see that it is interesting that Africa was framed around colonialism, pre, during, post. And of course, I think, Africa is much more nuanced than that. But, again, I take the perspective that I was clear that that's what I wanted to learn, was what was that framing, so that I could start to work out for myself what is the framing that I thought served us and served our people.
All right. I mean, I have to ask that because there's 1,000 African Voices. The reason we exist is so that we can understand, or at least try and unpack who we are, who we were before, say, the 19th century, who we became, and who we can become as the continent. So this post-colonial Africa is really our interest on 1,000 African Voices. So it will be really fascinating to go through your thesis and understand some of your findings and how that has possibly shaped the person that you are. So you studied that and you decided that you were going to go into leadership. So as I was going through your profile, I thought to myself, I really would like to be part of the Narachi Leadership Circle. And I sort of touched on it earlier, but I'm genuinely now wanting to understand how I become part of your world and what sort of benefits I can look forward to deriving from being part of the Narachi Leadership Circle. If you can just take us through that process.
Yes, sure. So, I mean, most of my clients are either by word of mouth, so they're referred to us at Narachi Leadership by people who've experienced my work or our work, because we are also growing in terms of members within the organization, but also affiliates that we work with broadly who also identify with the Narachi Leadership brand. Or people literally reach out to me. I'm on social media, for example, which I think is the easiest for people of our generation. I'm on Instagram under Narachi_leadership. I'm on Facebook as Rachel Nyaradzo Adams. I'm also on LinkedIn as Rachel Nyaradzo Adams. And those are my major platforms. So literally, I have clients who reach out to me on those platforms and say, how can I work with you? How could you support me on the journey that I'm on? And we are very open. I mean, one of the gifts that I come with is that I really have no preferred audience. I'm very comfortable with a 65-year-old man and working through his stuff, as I am comfortable with an 18-year-old kid from anywhere, really, and I've worked with a range of leaders, across that age spectrum. So yeah, people can reach out to me whichever way they find most easiest for them, and we are open.
All right. It's a nice segue, and I know that just based on what I've read, that you've worked with leaders from at least 47 African countries. I do wonder, when you work with someone from Senegal and then maybe the following week you're sitting with someone from Malawi and then Egypt, Ethiopia, wherever, are there differences that you pick up in terms of leadership style? Can you say, based on an engagement with someone from Ethiopia, are you able to say, you are from Ethiopia and this is the kind of leadership style that we attribute to Ethiopians? Are there similarities across the continent as well as differences that come up, or is it more or less the same?
So yes and no. The yes part is that all of us as leaders are a product of our cultural, political, socio-political, economic environments. And so you can certainly see that there are some differences. So I'll give you an example. Once we were doing, a colleague of mine, one of my affiliates, a wonderful woman, Donna Rachelson, who is a branding expert. We were in the US when I was still working at Yale, running a leadership program, and I invited her to come and do a branding module, And it was interesting because the African participants, it was all Africans in the room, but the African participants who were coming from countries that were extremely dictatorial were very nervous to actually brand themselves. You could see that they preferred to fly under the radar and to actually not have their businesses very publicized, because their argument was, if you brand yourself, the government comes after your company. They want a stake in it. They want to take the idea entirely. And so it becomes very difficult for me to actually thrive and live my passion and feed my family. Whereas the countries were coming from, I suppose, from a space where leaders weren't dictatorial. I don't want to say necessarily democracy, because democracies in Africa are very complicated. But, those were much more open to taking on branding as a tool to support them in their leadership. And so what you see is that leaders are influenced. The type of leadership we then lean towards, the leadership style we lean towards, the tools we are willing to accept have a lot to do with what we believe the environment allows us to take on. But the no is that because we work, Narachi Leadership works, as I often say, with the human soul. What we are working with extracting is your authentic power. I find that is universal. It doesn't make a difference where you're from. In fact, I do have clients, even a few clients now who don't live on the African continent, who live in the United States as an example. But what you see is this deep drive and desire, first of all, for people to reconnect with themselves. I would say for me, that is the core thing I find, is we are so disconnected from who we are authentically that the deepest human cry, I think, amongst leaders is, how do I be myself and still be effective? And so for me, the work is consistently reminding people that actually the authentic self is always there. You just have to remember it. You've forgotten it. You don't have to find it. You don't have to create it. We don't have to build it. It's always there with you, but it's often that part of yourself you're denying because, again, society has told you how you should show up. So I find there's a yes that is around cultural, environmental, socio-political issues and influences, but no, because actually we are all the same. Human beings are all the same at their core.
As you were talking, I was counting the number of times you used the word authentic or authenticity. So far I've counted 4 times. So we sort of now need to explore what you mean by authenticity, or by that I mean what is really the meaning of authenticity. Because what I find is, so you go through, you climb the corporate ladder. If you're in corporate, you put together what you believe is a persona that is likely to succeed within that space. Then you find yourself in a senior leadership position because you have created this persona, and the persona has been successful enough to get to the upper echelon. Now you are there. You no longer really have to maintain this persona. Now you have to be yourself. But there's so much doubt in your mind whether your authentic self can still exist successfully within that space, because what has launched you or propelled you to that level has been a persona that you've cultivated. So I'm curious to understand what your understanding and definition of authenticity is as it pertains to leadership.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. So Gary Zukav has a powerful quote on authentic power, which says creating authentic power means aligning your personality with your soul. And I've always loved that as a foundation because, first of all, authenticity for me is understanding that you came to the earth for a reason. So whichever belief system you come from, whether you believe in science and atoms and that those atoms sort of came randomly together, even science believes in the diversity of things and sees the diversity of things, the unique fingerprint, who you are in your conglomeration of your cells and your DNA, right? Or whether you're religious and you believe that you came here because of a higher power. At the end of the day, all of us have a unique gift that we come with to the earth that we will feel our most fulfilled when we start to unleash that gift into the world. And that gift will support us if we trust it in ways that we can't even imagine. So for me, when I talk about authenticity, the first piece is to work on understanding what is that gift? What is the purpose for which I came? And the second one is understanding that persona that we do create in the work environment out of the pressures of, you should be charismatic and you should be visible, and whatever it is that we get told about how to be successful in the work environment, actually causes a lot of damage for people because it's a mask. And when people are consistently masking, the impact, because of the kind of yoke that it puts on your system, it's burdensome, right? When you're consistently having to be schizophrenic about who you are, we all know this. Fake it until you make it, except you find most people don't make it faking it. You just become a more distant version of yourself. And I think that's problematic. And so with authentic power, we're trying to move away from that. The third thing I believe about authenticity and authentic power is that once you have accessed what your gift is and what you came to the earth to do, and once you start to breathe that externally, you also start to find that authenticity also becomes about being able to adjust with the requirements of that leadership moment. So, for example, if I observe that my authentic self as part of it, because there are many aspects of authentic self, personality, gift, as I keep talking about, aspects of your preferences, which also fall under personality, right? So there are many aspects that fall into what we mean when we say authentic self. The values that drive you, the unique values. My top 3 values are education, freedom, and excellence. Those are my top 3 values over the last 3 years. And so they drive me and make me unique in the world. But when I experience certain leadership moments, authenticity is also about being able to respond, working from the core of who you are, not betraying your personality, not betraying your values, not betraying the gift, but being able to respond to the leadership moment so that you can access other leadership archetypes that you may not necessarily access. So, for example, if you hear me speak right now, and I don't know if it translates, but I'm in an extremely quiet and very sort of intuitive type of leader, very going with the flow of the moment and connecting to human beings in that way. But there's certain moments that require for me to take on the archetype of resolution, for example, which is more, what are the facts on the table? What is the resolution I'm coming to? Especially because, I find myself even now with this leadership work, where I find myself being confronted, for example, by people who are not genuinely coming for the work, but are coming for something else. Being a woman doing this work on the continent, there are people who come your way with other kinds of energy that are not welcome. And in that moment, I step out of what I usually am to access a warrior archetype, fighter archetype, that is able to say, I do not appreciate this kind of behavior and you will stop. And so for me, that is what authenticity is. It's the ability to access the authentic core of who you are, but also the ability to respond to the authenticity of the moment and what it requires.
No, beautifully said. The reason I posed the question, Rachel, is sort of personally I've gone through that where you wonder whether you start being yourself or if you introduce yourself later in the equation, once you can afford to be who you are. And it sounds funny to say afford to be who you are, but we live in a world where we view successful attributes in a particular way. So you're able to then set aside who you are and in exchange for who you believe you need to be in order to attain success. And that's why I'm interested in the question of authenticity. So thank you for breaking that down.
And can I say something just in addition to that, Arbengwe, is that I believe that belief system that we have to, and I love the way you say it, that we can't afford to be who we are, really starts from a question that we get asked from when we are children. What would you like to be when you grow up? And that sets in our mindset a pattern of believing that there is a when I shall be connected to what I really am supposed to be doing. But the truth of the matter is that, and I say this when I do my strengths-based leadership workshops, children are the closest to who they are because they haven't yet been polluted by, our problematic belief systems as adults. They are the closest to who they are. So you see it in the things they do. Children only do the things they love to do. In a normal circumstance where they're not being abused or they're not in a dangerous environment, children do what they love. They gravitate towards what is true to who they are. And so because we keep asking them, what do you want to be when you grow up? No, not that artsy fartsy stuff. No, that's not sophisticated enough. No, that's too rebellious. What is the cookie cutter thing that we can all accept and we can all respect you for that you want to do? And so it becomes a habit. It becomes a habit for us to look outside of ourselves for models of how to be, instead of immersing ourselves internally. So even when people say think out of the box, I say, but why? Why can't I think inside my box? My box has plenty things that I still need to consider and explore that are powerful. Thinking outside of the box continually forces me to get out of myself. And then the problem becomes when adults continue in this pattern. There's in our brain, there's something called neural pathways, right? Which are these pathways of being, of thinking, of doing that we are building over time. And if you can't afford to be yourself and you're faking it, that fake becomes the neural pathway. So it sets in. And then people are now 40 and now 50 and they're struggling to return to that self. I'll tell you a big question I come across, like I said earlier, is, but what is my strength? But what is my gift? But who am I? And I just always think, what a terrible human condition we find ourselves in, that people are so disconnected from the fullness, because we are always full. We just need to remember that, of who we are.
I really like that. I know there are listeners who write in and complain every time or when I agree with a guest. They sort of always want the host to disagree. But in this instance, I'm nodding my head thinking, gee, this is really the message that the world needs. I like that you touched on strength-based leadership. It's a concept that sort of resonates with me. So sometimes within the, again, corporate environment, you come with your strength and someone wants to rather spend the time to focus on your weaknesses so that one day the weaknesses can be converted to strengths. Or you can just focus on what someone is really good at. And if you focus on that, I know there are psychological theories that say if you do more work on your strengths, naturally the weaknesses that you have will then be upgraded to sort of, let's call it medium level. Whereas if you focus on your weaknesses and you want to get that to the level where your strengths are, all you're doing is to lower the strengths that you already have. So in the end, you become this average person as opposed to just focusing on what your strengths are and allowing the weaknesses to catch up with your strengths. So yeah, I'm a big fan of strength-based leadership. So thank you for touching on that, Rachel.
Absolutely.
All right, Rachel, I don't know, sort of before we say goodbye, and hopefully as we say goodbye, most of us will go to NarachiLeadership.com to explore further and to establish a connection with not only yourself, but the organization that you represent. I'm wondering if there are perhaps things that we haven't touched on or covered that you would like to leave our listeners with.
Well, I would leave them with the message I've been driving now, which is that the greatest power you're ever going to fall into is already with you. And often I find leaders suffering through skills and how do I be a better leader as a skill set. And I really love something that Gita Balin says, which is that leadership is not a skill. It's a consciousness. It's a way of being in the world. And I would encourage your listeners to invest in their consciousness. And how do you invest in your consciousness? First of all, start by honoring that which you know to be true of you. Be brave to be you. And that takes courage in a world where we are told it's not appropriate. Be brave to be you, but read broadly and read material, that isn't your comfort zone to read, stuff that challenges you and builds new ways of thinking. Don't be afraid to challenge the belief system you currently reside in. Surround yourself with the tribe of people who energize you in what you do. I often say to people, don't be afraid to fire people from your life. If they're not serving you in terms of allowing you to grow, it's okay to cut ties and move on to what really serves you. But ultimately, Africa is going to be a much better place when people can connect to that power and that genius within. where we can, because we are connected to our strengths, we can actually solve the problems that plague us. And we have many on this continent, so that we can give dignity to ourselves and dignity to all of our people. So that journey of going inward and remembering, not finding, remembering who you are will be the greatest gift you give yourself. That's what I would leave you with.
Remembering who you are will be the greatest gift you can give yourself. But perhaps the last question from me, and maybe fittingly so, I want to go back to Ms. Gweru, so you would have had enough practice in that time to answer the following questions. But Rachel, if you were the president of Africa for a day, how would you go about solving the problems that inflict our continent? What are some of the things that you believe as a continent, if done well, will see our continent competing with the best in the world?
Oh, it's a beautiful question. I think, first of all, I would change our education systems. It's a day, so I would start advocating for the change of education systems, that they, teach young children to honor themselves and to remember who they are always. But secondly, because that's how they'll access their genius. I often say, Albert Einstein was a genius because he understood college level maths, algebra, physics when he was 11. So because he pursued that path, to your point about the 10,000 hours of working your strengths, he became a genius. I would do that. But B, teaching people to connectivity to the environment and to other human beings. Because when we are deeply connected in that way, we can't be abusive. We can't think tribally. We can't think, and I mean tribe in the negative way. We can't cause wars and conflicts because we are connected to others. So I would tackle that. The second thing is I would, stop talking about the creation of jobs and start to talk about becoming more deeply connected to entrepreneurship, which is, again, problem solving, really looking at our environments and saying, what are the solutions that will allow us to access our humanity much more easily? And, thirdly, and I love the point you've made, I suppose, intuitively, is I would actually discard this idea of 55 countries and start to work towards an African Union that is actually an African Union, because, again, diversity is what is going to allow us to live out our fullest strengths as a continent. I don't believe the way we are now is actually very supportive to our strength as a geography. So that's those are the three things I would start to do.
Rachel Nyaradzo Adams, the founder of Narachi Leadership, I meant to say, and sort of an award-winning, suppose, person will be the broad description of the Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellowship, the Mandela Rhodes Scholarship, the Mellon Mays Leadership and Service Award, the Mellon Mays Scholarship, and the Felix Scholarship. And I'll pause here because we only have 40 minutes. If I had half a day, I'll go through all your accolades. It's been such a pleasure to listen to your views on not only Africa, on leadership, life in general. And it's one of sort of the greatest pleasures of hosting this show is to come across people like yourself, Rachel, to be on this side of the conversation and listen to views that are so progressive, and you listen to that and think, man, as the African continent, our future is bright because we have leaders on this very continent. We only really need to believe and support each other. And one day, hopefully, we will have the United States of Africa, because when we do that, then most of our problems go away. So, Rachel, from myself, Avurengwisi, I would like to truly thank you for making the time to lend your voice to the 1000 African Voices project. And I really do wish you well. And hopefully our listeners will go on not only your website, but they'll follow you on Twitter at Rachel N. Adams, or on Instagram, Narachi_leadership. So again, Rachel, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Apureng. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
1000 African Voices.
You've been listening to 1000 African Voices. Please join us next time as we bring you yet another African voice. 1000 African Voices is produced by Avurengwisi. Sam Ganich is our sound engineer, with our head researcher Jones Maleka. The intro soundtrack for the show is by the legendary Salif Gator from his 1995 album Forlorn. The song you're listening to right now is by Chronix, and the title of the song is Legend. For more information, including the contact details of our guests, please visit us on our website www.1000africanvoices.com. You can also subscribe to our show on iTunes by searching for 1000 African Voices. We are also available on Stitcher. You can find us as well on Podbean. The only thing we ask of you is that you subscribe to our show by logging on to 1000africanvoices.com and click the subscribe button. That helps us grow. It helps us keep producing and bringing to you more African voices. Until next time, Kungana Africa, and take care.
Being an ordinary person doing what's right. Yesterday at the football game, a little girl asked me my name. She said, "Sir, I've seen you before. Tell me, who are you?" I said, "I am a legend that you never heard of before." I said, "I am a lion, but you never heard me roar. I am a hero that nobody celebrates. But if one person remembers my name, that means on the ocean of fame I'm an unknown sailor. I'm the percussionist playing with the whalers, the one with the shaker, the mover and shaker. My name wasn't on the front of the paper, but me not cater. Much more than the work is greater. Creation glorifies creator. So all deeds done are in the name of my maker. I am a legend that you probably never hear about. Words from the lion's mouth. I am a hero that nobody celebrates. But if one person remembers my name, give praise, that means I made a change. Story of my life, ordinary person just like you. If you take a look inside, you see the great things that people do. We're out here changing lives day and night, day in, day out. BBC don't show, CNN don't show.